Morning. Right, so we're going to have a little look at using some watercolour today. And we've got some cheerful spring hyacinths, or winter ones, depending on when you planted them. And just to bring in a little bit of a touch of colour, I'm going to do two different sections of a demonstration today, because I'll do one that's kind of a bit more fluid, and then I'm going to work in the detail on one that's a little bit more in detailed, just so that we can see the difference. So enjoy, and I'll catch up at the end. I just flick over to my camera so you can see. There we go. Okay, so I have a few little bits of pictures here. If I demonstrate all through with a very loose picture, it will be a very different effect to having let something dry beforehand, which is why I've got this little one that I started yesterday. I'm going to just work into a little bit more into some of the details there, because that will be dry and ready, so we can do those things. And I'm just going to have a little look with you at some of the different things. So interestingly, this one is obviously the flowers just represented in a much looser manner, and in here I've just popped through a little bit of ink. There's all sorts of things that you can all sorts of ways of using watercolor. I think you'll see on here the biggest difference, this one is gouache, so the biggest difference people will ask is in the amount of pigment that you have in gouache. It's much more opaque, very, the colors are very, very bright. You can get brighter colors on watercolor. We just need to load up the brush with more color than water, and obviously if we want to thin that down, we will thin it right down, which I'll show you in a moment. The other one that I haven't shown on here are watercolor pencils, and actually people really enjoy using those. So what we will get with watercolor pencils is, I can go over and make much more of a deeper color with my watercolor pencil. I'm just using circular motions, but you can use any. And then if I did that much more loosely, I'll get a different tone. So let's just test that. So I've got a set of watercolor brushes here. I do tend to, when I'm using my watercolor brushes, keep them separate, so I don't use them for anything else. Things like, you could, but the thing with using acrylic on them is that it will dry, they will dry and get a bit hard. So you will, they don't last as long, and actually watercolor brushes can be quite expensive, so I just need to bear that in mind. So here we go. So this is obviously a light touch with a watercolor pencils that we can draw on, and actually people really enjoy that process where you draw in your color, and then you can use your brush to then to wet the paper. You can kind of spread it out a bit, but you can see the difference. What I'm trying to illustrate really is the difference in the depth of the color just with using the watercolor pencil in with more pressure. So it's nice, but if you wanted to, you could color the whole thing in with watercolor, with pencil first, and then just go over the different areas and everything, or you can do little bits, sections at a time. And so there's you can even mix in watercolor pencils, kind of get some of those more linear lines if you want drawn in, or you can go really loose. So the thing is, as I said, there are so many different ways of using watercolor. I'll just show you a couple of pieces. These are not mine, but I'm going to show you them anyway. So we've got something like this, which is very, very kind of fluid, but then you've got a little bit of pen in here that the artist has used kind of just to illustrate just a few places, used very sparingly. So you can do that over with your pen once it's dry, and make it, you can even break the lines up and make it very loose. This vase has been done with salt. We can experiment with salt, where you put a little wash on with a colour and you pop the salt in places. Then you can even carefully, when it's dried a little bit more, work in with some of the areas. with a bit more darker colour if you want to, just to get a nice kind of textured feel if you've got a textured area you want to do. So that's one. Another one that is getting very loose here. You know, you've got this one. So again, you've got real kind of loose, very, very loose, a bit washy here. That's obviously been put on afterwards. You can tell that this has been popped on afterwards because you can see where the lines go up, but actually it's still quite effective. There's no set rule. You do not have to do a wash behind it. And I think I would expect, because there's some quite light areas with watercolour here, that we'll have to leave out. You know, that's the difference with watercolour when we get started. You've got to leave the areas that are white, that they've perhaps put that in because there's so much, you know, there are so many areas of white that they've just decided to put the wash on in the background afterwards, which is absolutely fine. It's very arty, very artisan, isn't it? Very loose, as we sometimes see watercolour, but you can work totally differently. So you can also, you know, work in quite in more detail. You can still get the bit of the wash through and make it washy. So it's entirely up to you, and you won't know. That's what I will say to people, is you won't know until you have a go whether you like it really loose, really detailed, or a mixture of both, and it's trial and error. So that's why I've got a few different pictures on the go here, just to show you that you know, you can work more tightly or more loosely. It's entirely up to you, with less detail, etc. in there. So and interestingly, when you are working at night, you'll have a different effect. And this was under my camera last night, so I've got far more depth of colour in here than I would normally put on, because the cameras were not picking up the colours as well under the night light. So so I've got, you know, some more darks in here than I would perhaps put in normally, but that's fine. So yes, it's trial and error really. So you can go ahead and, you know, actually draw this out if you want to. Let's have a little look. So, you know, if we were to, I'll just put this to the side for the moment. If we were to think about, you know, how we are going to get this onto our paper, we can just use some proportion. So you can tie yourselves in knots over this, you know, making everything perfectly mathematical, but really actually an easier way of doing it is just working out approximate amounts. So, you know, you can work out, is this about a quarter of the final height? And I would guess it probably is. So I know that I've got the same again up to here, with including these bulbs. So you can think about this in terms of 1/4 is the tin, you know, the container. Another quarter is the bulb and the leaf. You know, another quarter is the top of the next group of leaves, and then another quarter perhaps the top, so from there to the top of the next one. So it's a very simplified way of doing it. However, it is easier, and then you can just get started without having really worrying. Some people like to draw grids when they're first kind of starting out to get that in, and you can, but for me personally, I don't prefer that way of working, because I think you can do the same thing with quarters and halves and thirds to get an approximate amount, and it's you know, and it's just a much more enjoyable way of getting started than drawing out the grids. You know, sometimes people just get lost in the mathematics of things, as opposed to just, you know, getting on and getting a paint down. So, but it's either way, whichever suits. So I'm just going to decide at which point I want to start. So I want to follow the line around really. And again, you know, I'm going to do this quite dark, but mine will show through. So I have to do it a little bit if we're just demoing, you know, how to actually, you know, map out your proportion and everything. Whereas you won't have to when you're at home and you're doing it. If you do want to draw any lines, then you can even put minimal ones in. You can even just do like the top of the tin, maybe the edge of it, you know, and just put minimal lines in. But you know, you can then you can see yours. So this is just really just for the benefit, all I'm doing this for is the benefit of the camera. But yeah, you know, with watercolor it will come through. And if we're looking at the angles here, you know, people do say I'm really struggling with the angle, and you just can get your pencil up like that and just follow, you know, the angle that your pencil comes off at. And the same this side as well. We can try again here. So I'll put a little line there, and I'm just joining that in here. Okay, so that's obviously another benefit of not planning out. You can just go straight in. You do not have to do this kind of level of detail. I'm just showing you just for demonstration purposes, really. So again, if I was to look at another quarter up here where the bulbs and the things are, we can look at those bulbs and say, right, really, there's only 3. We can only fit 3 bulbs in across the way. So, and this one comes slightly further over. So yeah, so just just think, right, 1, 2, 3, that's about as much as I can get in there. So that's how we can look. There's another one kind of poking through the back there, isn't there? Look. So you can always pop that one in. And then again, I'm looking at whereabouts I want to come to. Now again, you know, if you're going to do a loose one, so I'll just demonstrate on here, like I'll draw this out first, and I'll demonstrate how you can just kind of get your loose ones in without doing all of that. So there we are. Let's have a look. So quite nice structurally. We can, this one's obviously going across the front, so I'm going to pop that one in. It's quite structural, isn't it? You know, the hyacinth bulb leaves, which is quite nice. Just working through it, really. That's all we're doing. This one crosses over, so if something comes behind, we can just pop that in. Behind the flowers as well, actually. Yeah, when they're nice and structural like this, it's not, you don't really get lost, whereas you can get lost in the leaves of you know, other plants and things like that. But it's one of those things, you know, watercolor can be used much more flexibly than people think, I think. Or I don't think that, I think that ways of working in watercolor has just changed. You know, a lot of people mix up the media now. You know, watercolor, gouache, even, like, you know, acrylics sometimes as well. And you can, you know, whereas if you want to follow a more traditional, then yeah, you need to be really careful and leave these little blank bits. You can even get some masking fluid and tape and like draw in between the lines, which basically dries like a gum. And then once you've finished your picture, it means you can paint over it in the colour, and you just peel it off and it leaves the white paper behind. So that's a more traditional way of working, or just to observe and leave those blank. But obviously there are other ways as well. So so you've just got to have a go and go, you know, just really enjoy it. So again, so we're looking at the next kind of quarter up here. We're looking at you know, whereabouts these flowers come to. That one's poking up a little, slightly bit further, isn't it? So I'll move that one up a little bit. In fact, I think it's the one behind, actually. That one's coming up behind there. In here, that's slightly higher. This one's slightly lower. So so yeah, so just working through. So this obviously, when you want to be more kind of careful, you know, you want to be more detailed with it, and you enjoy the detail, then that's absolutely fine. So we've got these stems going up. You can almost follow that through if you want, just to help you, you know, direct where your flowers are going to. That one's coming up that way. This one then comes up the back. I'm going to just place the line there for this tall one. And then we've got this one in the front, and then the one behind is much more structural. interestingly, although they have these bell shapes, quite often, depending on when they're opening, they're not always really symmetrical, because some of these bells open at different times. So you can end up with like some frilly, some straight, some, you know, all, so they're quite interesting for that reason, really. Right. So let's have a little look. So this one. So all I'm going to do, I'm kind of just going to make some. I'm going to make some. If I can see a shape, I'll just put like a little sketchy shape in, and if I can't, then I'm just going to make the shapes that I can see, really. And you don't have to take hours and hours, but you can, because they are all a bit mishy-mashy, aren't they? Some of them, like that one's got a bit of a bell shape. That's the only real bell shape I can see in that one there. There we go. Yeah, it's just fun, actually. It's nice and fun, isn't it? So this one at the top. There we go. And then here we go. What else I've got in here? One coming up there. So it's quite frilly. So I'm keeping it quite frilly. You know, and if you get more solid shapes, like there's a few more solid ones at the bottom here, you can pop them in. A bit frilly there. But again, you know, the thing is with watercolor as well, like any other medium, it's our representation of what we see. So to some people, representing it in a loose way will just feel really natural, and to others, representing it with more detail feels really natural. So, you know, have a go at both, and then go for the one that you really feels nice to you. There's no, you know, there's no rules that say it has to look this way or that way. It's just nice to develop your own preference on how it makes you feel when you do it. And if you feel like you're going against something that's natural to your hand, then you probably are. So it's having the courage as well to go, no, this is what I like to do. And that is absolutely brilliant. That's what we need. You know, the thing is, when people will look at a piece you might have done and say, well, I think you should do this and I think you should do that, which is just natural, isn't it? It's human nature to want to comment on it. But actually, it's just up to you. At the end of the day, it stops with you. Right, there we go. So I've got a tall one up the top and then just another one little here. So this one's more structural. You can see all of these, you know, kind of going upwards. And again, you know, I'm just kind of making the shapes. I'm not to a general feel that I want. A feel from there we go. Right, so that's that. So that's one that's obviously been kind of put in detail. This one is, there's no drawing in that, it's just been totally in there. So so obviously if you want to kind of work from there and you just want to kind of like just get your brush and just have a real go on your paper, and that is absolutely fine. So here we go. So I'm going to move my palette over actually, because so that you can see some of the colours before we get started. So obviously I've got a pan. The pan watercolours are just basically, it's just a word. These are like little pans. So you can get them in tubes, And then you just make sure you just squirt a small amount out. You know, the biggest thing I think is once you find a colour that you like, and testing is key with watercolour because it's quite difficult to see. And also some of these pans, you know, when you look at some of the colours in the set, it's like, well, I'm really not sure actually, you know, what colour that is. I just, you know, there's loads of colours in there, or there might only be a few. So even if you've only got a few, it doesn't matter. But if you're testing them, you can then also test how thin you need to make it, because what we're going to do, obviously, is we're going to, you know, work. If we've got more detail one, we just have got to kind of reserve some areas of white within that painting, or we can take it out with a bit of tissue, which I tend to do sometimes as well, or we can throw a bit of salt in, which I'm going to go and have a go at doing in a bit just to see, which we did here. Threw a bit of salt in onto this yesterday, onto the texture to make it textured. So we'll have a go at that as well. So yeah, so test your colour. So, you know, people say, do I need to stretch my paper? Do I need to do this? Well, I think for a little sketch like this, I wouldn't really, it's not that necessary. And it's not always necessary either, because you can buy some nice thick papers as well that you can use in a sitting, and it's absolutely fine. You might be more concerned about wetting your paper and stretching it if you're doing a big piece, or you are wanting to come back to something and add more layers on it. It stops it bowing in the middle like a big landscape that you've got lots, you know, it's very, very wet. So let's have a look. So this is a very different colour that I had to use a very different colour last night to make it show up. So that's interesting, isn't it? So here we go. So so that's the colour I want to do, but obviously that's for kind of some of the darker areas. So what I want to be able to do, I'm going to add a little bit of a yellowy colour to that. And on your palette, really, it's just time to have a go and mix. Just use the areas to mix it. That's not quite colour I want, it's too yellow. I'm going to add a little bit more the pink to it, and then just thin it down slightly. And we're adding more water to make it more translucent. So that's another go down here. So that's the one I was using it before. Okay, that's slightly thinner. Yep, could try that. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to just work in like light to dark. Because obviously with watercolor, the main thing is that you can't go over a dark color with a light one, because it's not opaque enough. Watercolor is very, you know, translucent. Unless you're using it straight from the tube and it's a tube, you've got more chance of doing that, obviously, when it's thick. So all I'm going to do here is start to pop in some of, you know, just work into some of these areas. A lot of them actually, but just trying to reserve some white areas between them where I can see it on the paper. Just very enjoyable actually. So this is if you want to be a little bit more controlled with it. It's quite a good way to start, to be fair, because it feels more comfortable if you're used to working that way. But there's no set rules. Yes, just get some of these in. I'm just leaving a few areas of white. There's quite a few on there. So what you might also want to do is with a bit of a clean brush, is just you can watch. I'll do this one. You can just lift it out. Look, or more obvious, if you've got to think, oh, there's an area around that, the edge of that there that I've not got, just lift it out bit straight. You've got to do it quite quickly, and then I might just, you know, use the inside of it then. Put some areas on here. Now, obviously, I'm working very small, so if you're working bigger, you'll be able to be a little bit more directed with your paint. There's not an awful lot of area free on this tiny one. But, so I've got to be a bit more selective about where I put it. And if there are any frilly bits I need to lift out, I'm just going to get a circle and kind of just pick them out like that, because it's quite, but whilst it's damp, and sometimes if you're in a warm room, it will dry faster. So you've just got to be aware of that. Right, I'm still going to use this light pink, because if I've got any other colours I want to put in, I'll just come in and darken them as opposed to, you know, around the area. There we go. Get some of those in. Now on this side there's almost some yellowy bits on there, isn't there? So I will pop a bit of yellow in here. So just working that in really nicely, just all the way. And again, if you think, oh no, I think I'll just lift a tiny bit out. So I'll lift a bit more out, especially when you're working fiddly. But again, this is why people like to use the masking fluid, because they don't have to do that. But it just depends. If you really enjoy a brushwork and you don't want the process side of it, then it's just as easy just to take it out. So there we go. Right, so obviously that's the leaves there. These leaves were very different, so this is where, you know, you can mix up your colour. And again, I'm just using my palette to mix the general colour. I'm keeping them a bit separate, and what we've got to really be careful with watercolour is make sure you change your, you know, change your water, because there's nothing like muddy water to muddy up your picture and you know, swap those things out. So yeah, clean brushes, give them a wipe in between as well, so you don't transfer darks into, you know, those colours into each other. So something like this, you know, literally is very different. So let me find another colour to show that. Now I'm going to go a bit yellowy. Look at some water, make sure it's clean. I'm going a bit yellowy pink here. Still too yellowy though, so let's put a bit more pink in it. Yeah, a bit more peachy, that one, isn't it? There we go. Okay, so it all depends, doesn't it, on how much of each colour you put in. Right, so if I was doing something like that and I just wanted to get the shape, just turn over and use it on here, and that's what I will do. I'm just going to go and try and represent that shape. I'm just going to key in all of the lighter coloured areas that I've got. I'm just trying to represent it really. Notice I'm doing this one much bigger. So at the moment it's just going to look quite, you know, quite washy. Now you can, if you really want to, just finish this one a bit first. So yeah, so I'm trying to keep some whites between, but it's looking much more, there's much less shape to it at the moment, and then I can work in a little bit into that. Now you can leave it to dry it, or you can drop colours in, but obviously you've just got to be a bit careful. Some people love it when it's like, so obviously the difference between me dropping some colours in is it's got, you know, it's spreading now. Looking at where like the centres of the dark areas are, but some people love it, if you know, love letting it spread, but other people want to leave it just to dry just that little bit more. But you've got to work out, you know, do you like the spready effect, or do you want to keep it a little bit more neater and let it dry in between? It's entirely up to you, really. It just gives a different effect. You can still pull through, you know, shapes and colours and things like that. Okay, and then if then you think, oh, I need some white, you know, I need some white areas, what we could try actually, you can try doing the you know, just kind of pulling. You can use all sorts of things actually. Just get the brush out so I can use some of these light and highlighted areas. Just going to come dampen my brush, but not so it's soaking, and then I can just, you know, take out anything I'm not sure about. And then I can create some of these. I can just screw up a bit of the end and just kind of create a crinkly feel with these hyacinths, and then keep adding to it. So this obviously, this is a more looser way of doing it working. And again, with the greens and things, if you've only got a restricted palette, it's fine. You know, when you look at these, there's some dark areas in there, but there's also some kind of quite yellowy greeny areas. So again, it's just having a little look at your looking at what you've got in your palette. If you will have a yellow, and even if you've only got one green, you can just yellow up your green a little bit, you know. Let's test that. Okay, it's not quite as yellow as I want it at the bottom. Now, and each section I'm tending to, you know, lean towards putting on the lighter colour first. So I'll keep this separate on my palette. Just bringing in a little bit. Okay, that's better. So again, you know, I can like start to look at the representing the leaves in there, starting to pop in. I'm not, you know, I'm not doing any drawing. Just using like the edges of my brush. You can even use like the points to kind of make it really to make the points of the leaves. Because we can work into these sections a little bit anyway. Got different ones in the background there. So that's a lighter area. And then if I want to work in my other greens again, you know, decide how long do you want it to dry for? Are you just going to drop it in? What are you going to do? You know, you can make it nice and loose and just kind of drop it down. Pull it down a bit. I'm going to pop some through because I can see this lovely colour kind of weave through. And again, you know, if you get to a point you think, oh, I've made that a bit too dark, then just take it out quickly. You've got to work. I think swiftly is the key though in it when it's an area that's when you're working in a room that's a bit, you know, it's got some warmth to it. You know, so if I was doing like switching over, so obviously one there is I can then work in a little bit more if I want to. I might go into a keep my brush size or work down a brush. It's entirely up to you. So I'd probably go in and let's have a little look. Yeah, I might want to put in a little bit more where there's a bit more shadow side, just to give it a little bit more shape. Or I could even do a little bit of the, you know, the pen we were talking about, the pen and ink. So yeah, you don't even have to define it. It's just a very different way of, it's a different way of working. That's much more loose. And again, we can go back into that and pop in darker colour if we want to, or not, just to get some of the depth to the, some of these flowers, really. That's what I was thinking. It's just nice, it's really nice, enjoyable process. Yeah, so obviously that's more watery and this is more fixed. So, going back onto this one, then, I can start to drop in those dark colours, as we said. But it's kind of a bit more precise. So, we're looking at where are the areas that are more deeper, on the flower. Let's pop those in. So I'm not going to do the whole of it. I'm just going to do little bits for you so you can see. Two very different, but we can still get a sense that there is we've got these light and shady areas. Okay. Get that frilliness on there, just dotting about a bit of colour. It's a really nice one to just have get some real focus on, because a lot of the time our minds are very like dotting about here, there, because we're so busy, distracted. This, that, got to do that, oh, I've got to do that now. But actually, it's really not important to be able to switch off at times and just really focus on one thing really well. We're not actually programmed to have 1,000,001 things going on at the same time. Right. So, even like you might have some areas that are a bit warmer. I can see some areas that are almost like kind of got some yellowy colours in. So I'll start to pop these in here on this side. A bit more there. Okay, so they're quite nice and loose. I can go do the same I've done there and weave a bit of this green through as well. See it? Some of the areas are a bit more green, aren't they, on there? On the stems. And then, you know, if you've got any, then you can work on, you know, have you got any real dark areas of contrast? Well, there are some quite dark areas in there. You know, and decide what colour you want to use, really. Do you want to use a really dark green one? Do you want to use a you know, a purpley one, a bluish one? What do you want to use? And again, you know, testing it out is really important. I'm actually going to go for this blue green, quite like that. So in here, again, I can drop some where the greatest depth is here. Look on this. And we're just making that, because contrast is important really everywhere. It does help. So in here now, I'm just going to go in, see where we've got the most depth. And now it looks really dark. And that will make the light areas stand out and give us, you know, create the shape between, the shadows between as well. Right. So look at popping some of these in to balance this out using some of these. So this is obviously the more precise one. And even dropping a little bit of, you know, a yellowy tone. If you're doing big areas and you know that you really like a colour, one of the keys to doing that is just making sure you've mixed enough, especially if you're mixing a few colours together, because sometimes it's difficult to recreate those. So there we go. Let's get those lighter colours in first. Pop a bit of yellow in. Okay. So yeah, we're just working through with it really. It's just nice. It's a lovely, lovely process. So I'm going to just be a bit quiet whilst I'm working now and just focus on getting these ones done. Okay. So just obviously the two are quite different. Can soften that down a bit as well, so it's less linear. But yeah, you can, we can go into, you can keep going into detail on the contrast and adding the contrast as we go through, and then the same with, with the bulbs as well. The lovely bulbs showing at the top of the soil, don't they, these? So again, you can go really loose with it, or you can go a little bit more detailed with it, working lights to dark. It's looking at the colours in that you can see in there. And we can all see different things actually. There's even some, like, I personally can see like oranges and things, but you put in what you can see. So I'm starting with my lighter ones. You can see, I can see almost a very pastel-y. I'm actually going to add, make sure it's clean actually, keep checking that water. Make that slightly more ready, so we can we can apply our knowledge and use if something's purpley but a bit more ready, just add a bit more red to it. So I'm like trying to leave the texture, the light areas of texture in there, in here, so we can see the lines. So here, I'll still start with my light, and then I want to build up this colour a bit. And then, just adding the contrast of the real darks in there as well. That one's black, I don't really want to use that. If you're trying to get a really dark colour, you can, you can use like blues, dark, blues in with your purples and things like that to get them really dark. If you haven't got a massive selection, just deepen it with some, sort of some blue, if that's the tone that you're seeing on there. There we go. Let's try that. Let's just try. Yeah, and the moment it's got a bit darker than that actually. Now, obviously, I'm mixing up quite small amounts. I'll try and deepen it with a little bit of brown actually, because it's got a. No, I'm going to make that slightly more blue. Try again. Oh, okay, let's try. So, yeah, I'm just going to go in because it's still quite damp. Just bring in some of these colours into it. I can let that wash out again, but again, you've got to be a bit careful about that it doesn't run everywhere you don't want it. But it's quite loose, and then you've got this lovely, get these lovely kind of bits at the top of the bulbs as well. There we go. And same in here, so I'm just going to stick with that same colour. So I might just be a bit more careful, with this, make sure it's because it's got less washy and got more detail, and getting the texture around where the areas of the bulbs are, you know, casting a shadow together. So that's naturally where you get that depth of colour in there. And you can keep going, you know, and making your contrast darker or lighter or whatever it is. Now, obviously, this bulb's huge in comparison to the plant, so I'm just going to wash this bottom area out a little bit. So it's you know, the tin, because we really see a bit of it sticking up, don't we? So there we go. So if I wanted to put something in, then soil or something, I can keep that quite loose if I want to. You know, just do what you think. So that one's obviously very washy. If I want then to kind of pop in, just to get some definition of that there's you know, there's some like container here. I can also take out the light from this particular shutter. Take it out here with the edge of the paper. That's all right. And then probably what I would do there, just to get a sense that there is the, you know, the edge of the basket, because it's a little bit more linear, isn't it? Where we've got some linear bits in there. It's just wait for it to dry slightly a bit more than normal, and I have normally in here. And just pop in, you know. Doesn't even have to be doesn't it? You don't even have to make it a true, like, you can make it an unbroken line if you want to. So obviously I've only got part of the pot down here, and again, if you've got any areas that need lifting out of when you pot, take them out. Again, that's quite washy, really. It's quite different to this one that's a little bit more detail, but again, you just get a nice, you know, you get a nice effect with it. And if you think, oh, it's a bit too, actually it's a bit too not natural enough, and just kind of soften down the edges a little bit and let it splay in. But there we go. So yeah, so one that's more washy, as we would describe it, and then one that's a little bit more detailed and controlled. Can then kind of work in the areas in between these bulbs. Yeah, quite joyful, really, isn't it? Very enjoyable anyway. You just really play, and they're nice to pop in. I really do think it's lovely to be able to pop them like a little pocket book like this. Like this is like a postcard one, just in your pocket, with a nice little travel set in it, and you can just take it in the garden, or I know it's not great weather at the minute, or in any room really, because it's so easy. So yeah, in terms of making things a little bit more structured, you know, you can kind of pay attention to, really it's just looking at where the dark areas are and where the light is areas, choosing a color that you want to use for this, or you can just make, you know, you can change the container if you don't want to represent something like that. I would suggest, if that was me and I wanted to make it look like that, I'd be looking at areas of shadow here. So I've got like, you can go for grey if you want to. You could go for, to totally change the colour. If I was to go for grey, let's have a look. I might put a bit of violet in there actually, just so it's got a bit more kind of colour. So I'm looking down here, look. I'm stopping where the lines are, but I'm kind of creating this. It's quite a block of shadow, isn't it, really? Which is great. There's one here as well. So we kind of we're just building up really these areas of shade around, and then between the lines as well. So we've got these kind of lines going around. You don't have to make them really, have to be, and then that creates the just got to be careful. I follow the shape round with it as well. Look, on the shape round of the. So yeah, so putting all these shades, putting the shades in, actually creates the illusion of light reflecting actually. And then you can really go in with the, I'll go in with a smaller brush on here because it's a bit more detailed. You can go in with them slightly, you know, go to find your darkest areas in there. And then, you know, where it's sometimes where the end of this, bottom of this is. A bit under here where handles will go actually, a bit here. So where those real dark areas are, then, you know, then you can get those in. And it's that, again, it's this contrast that's really helping us to see, you know, the shape. Okay. Now again, if you're looking on there and you think actually I need to darken an area of shadow like this one here, then just go ahead, just darken it. There we go. So two very, very different little paintings. And then you can go, you know, that's, I think people say it's difficult to know when to stop. I think you've just got to go, okay, is there anything that's alarmingly different in there that I want to change? Because at the end of the day, not every piece we do is a masterpiece. Sometimes it's a little study or gives us a bit more insight into the way you apply the paint, or that the way you apply, or the way that the, you know, how much water you put on. That kind of information is really helpful, and you may even use your watercolor study to inform another piece of work that you do later on whatever the topic is. So so just use sessions as a time to, you know, create and learn, and that will be fine. So just one last little demo before, I think it's on the back of this one actually, where we had created this with a salt. So all you would do there is you can let's have a look. So let's get this colour. You can just, I've got kind of a mid wash, so it's not really dark, it's not really light. Is whilst it's wet, so you can use this on any texture, grab a little bit of salt and just pop it in areas where you would like a little bit more texture of light and dark. Now that'll take a while, but what it will do is kind of pull the paint all around, and it's always a little bit ad hoc as to the pattern that you come out with, but it's nice to experiment with these things, and you just let that dry. Let it dry, you know, it'll take a bit of time, let it dry off a little bit. And And you can even go in, you know, and I wouldn't say do it now, so leave it kind of 15 minutes. Obviously I haven't got the luxury of doing that right now, but then you can go in with some more paint and just drop in, you know, if there's anywhere that's kind of more like a darker area that you can see. It doesn't even have to be round the salt, it can be, or it could be, you know, just, it just creates this really nice texture. Now if I knock that off now, it's going to be it's not going to have worked because I've not let it dry long enough. No, it's not. So yeah, so you basically will get the mottled effect that I showed you on the back, you know, earlier on the with that on there. So there we go. So you can pick any flowers and have a little go and see what you really enjoy doing. Well, that was nice. That was very enjoyable. And see what you see also what you're attracted to when you do one of these pieces, because that's really important, is to find the things you enjoy doing the most, because that's what life's about, isn't it? Right, I'm going to switch back now. I will just flick this off, but it won't be done. We'll just have a very quick, okay, no, it's not nowhere near done. We've just got a very tiny bit, but that will suck out and it will get some nice light areas if you leave that on. So I'm just going to flick back. There we go. Ah, lovely. Right, so enjoy doing that, and if there's any questions, please do ask. You can also, I'm more than happy for you to send me your artwork as well, and I can share that. Okay, right, well, thank you very much, and see you again. Enjoy. Bye.